Sometimes life throws you a curveball so hard, it knocks the wind right out of you. But what happens when that curveball comes from your own flesh and blood, and it's aimed right at your heart, not just your wallet? What if they try to strip away everything you've built, everything you are, right in front of everyone, and the one person who should defend you just watches? My name is Eleanor Vance, and I want to tell you about the day my world shattered. It was a Sunday brunch, supposed to be a lovely family gathering at my son Michael's opulent home, but it quickly turned into a public execution of my dignity, all thanks to my daughter-in-law, Serafina, or Sarah, as she likes to be called. She decided to declare war on me simply because I dared to change a banking password. Listen to my story until the end and tell me, what would you have done in my place? The air in that lavish dining room was thick with attention you could almost taste. Sarah, usually so composed, launched into me with a venomous fury I hadn't witnessed before. Her face twisted into a mask of pure rage as she loudly accused me of senility, of being ungrateful, of interfering with their management of my affairs. This was all because I had finally changed the password to an online banking account I knew she'd been systematically draining for months. She didn't just scold me, she threatened to institutionalize me, to put me away, to make me disappear if I didn't stop causing trouble. And my son Michael? He sat there, my only child, his eyes glued to his plate. Not a single word of defense, not a flicker of concern. That silence, that spineless complicity, cut deeper than any of Sarah's cruel words. It wasn't just my money they were after, it was my home, my legacy, my very sanity they were trying to take away, right in front of everyone. You see, I wasn't always this vulnerable old woman they saw. My name is Eleanor Vance, and for decades, I was the quiet, sharp force behind my late husband Arthur's successful construction business. I was a self-taught forensic accountant, a whiz with numbers, with an almost photographic memory for every single detail. I built our nest egg, our beautiful home, with meticulous care and unwavering integrity. I was always prudent, always believed in family, and always thought I was setting things up for Michael, for our future. My life was a testament to hard work and financial prudence, a legacy I intended for my son. I was a loving, if sometimes reserved mother, always seeing the best in him, completely oblivious to the insidious greed that would eventually consume him and his wife. I trusted them implicitly, with everything I had left after Arthur passed. After Arthur passed away a year ago, a part of me went with him, leaving me adrift in my grief and terribly vulnerable. That's when Michael and Sarah swooped in, like vultures in expensive clothing, helping me manage my finances, they called it, but it was nothing more than a systematic raid on everything I had. They maxed out my credit cards, coerced me into signing over assets, and slowly, insidiously, drained my accounts dry. My once secure financial future evaporated, replaced by a mountain of debt and the crushing. Today, you will learn my revenge story, a tale of how I, Eleanor Vance, turned public humiliation and deep betrayal into a calculated plan to reclaim everything my son and his greedy wife tried to steal. Imagine being stripped of your dignity, your home, and your life savings, not by strangers, but by the very people you loved and trusted most. This isn't just a story about money, it's about a mother's heartbreak and the fierce resolve that rises when everything you hold dear is threatened. My name is Eleanor Vance, and I want to tell you about the day my world shattered. It was a Sunday brunch, supposed to be a lovely family gathering at my son Michael's opulent home, but it quickly turned into a public execution of my dignity, all thanks to my daughter-in-law, Serafina, or Sarah as she likes to be called. She decided to declare war on me, simply because I dared to change a banking password. Listen to my story until the end, and tell me, what would you have done in my place? The air in that lavish dining room was thick with attention you could almost taste. Sarah, usually so composed, launched into me with a venomous fury I hadn't witnessed before. Her face twisted into a mask of pure rage as she loudly accused me of senility, of being ungrateful, of interfering with their management of my affairs. This was all because I had finally changed the password to an online banking account I knew she'd been systematically draining for months. She didn't just scold me, she threatened to institutionalize me, to put me away, to make me disappear if I didn't stop causing trouble. And my son Michael? He sat there, my only child, his eyes glued to his plate, not a single word of defense, not a flicker of concern. That silence, that spineless complicity, cut deeper than any of Sarah's cruel words. It wasn't just my money they were after. It was my home, my legacy, my very sanity they were trying to take away, right in front of everyone. You see, I wasn't always this vulnerable old woman they saw. For decades, I was the quiet, sharp force behind my late husband Arthur's successful construction business. I was a brilliant, self-taught forensic accountant, a whiz with numbers, with an almost photographic memory for every single detail. I built our nest egg, our beautiful home, with meticulous care and unwavering integrity. My life was a testament to hard work and financial prudence, a legacy I intended for my son. I was a loving, if sometimes reserved mother, always seeing the best in Michael, completely oblivious to the insidious greed that would eventually consume him and his wife. I trusted them, implicitly, with everything I had left after Arthur passed. After his death a year ago, a part of me went with him, leaving me adrift in my grief and terribly vulnerable. That's when Michael and Sarah swooped in, like vultures in expensive clothing. Helping me manage my finances, they called it, but it was nothing more than a systematic raid on everything I had. They maxed out my credit cards, coerced me into signing over assets, and slowly, insidiously, drained my accounts dry. My once secure financial future evaporated, replaced by a mountain of debt and the crushing realization that my beloved home was on the brink of foreclosure. Emotionally, I oscillated between profound sadness, confusion, and a burgeoning sense of betrayal and anger. I was treated as a burden, a doddering old woman whose opinions were dismissed, my concerns ridiculed. The public humiliation at brunch, with Michael's tacit approval, was the final, devastating blow. It transformed my quiet despair into a burning desire for justice, a cold, unyielding resolve for retribution. They thought they had broken me, but they had only awakened a part of me I thought was long gone. They had made a grave mistake. What Michael and Sarah didn't know was that my greatest asset wasn't visible wealth, but the sharp, unyielding mind I had honed over decades of forensic accounting. Unknown to them, I maintained a meticulous, hidden set of shadow books for Arthur's business. These ledgers detailed every transaction, every investment, every potential liability, a habit born from my innate caution and my deep understanding of numbers. This secret provided an undeniable advantage. This secret ledger wasn't just old records. It contained irrefutable proof of Michael and Sarah's financial misdeeds, including details of shell corporations and fraudulent transfers. Furthermore, a small, untraceable offshore account, a quote, rainy day fund, Arthur had discreetly established years ago, provided me with the necessary seed money for legal counsel. My most crucial ally, however, would be Daniel Dan Miller, a high-powered corporate lawyer specializing in white-collar crime, whom I had mentored in his youth. Listen to this story until the end, and tell me, what would you have done in my place? My name is Eleanor Vance, and I'll never forget that Sunday brunch at my son Michael's lavish home. The smell of expensive coffee and fresh pastries hung in the air, but the atmosphere was thick, with something far more bitter. My daughter-in-law, Serafina, or Sarah, as she preferred, decided that day to publicly tear me down, all because I dared to change a banking password she'd been secretly draining for months. It wasn't just an argument. It was a brutal, calculated ambush, and it was just the beginning. Her face, usually so perfectly composed, twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. "You're senile, Eleanor, ungrateful. You're interfering with our management of your affairs." Sarah's voice, loud and cutting, echoed through the dining room, ensuring everyone present heard her accusations. She threatened to institutionalize me, to put me away where no one would hear my trouble. And Michael, my own son, my only child. He sat there, eyes glued to his plate, a silent, spineless witness. His inaction, his utter silence, was a betrayal that stung far worse than any of Sarah's cruel words. It was a public execution of my dignity. The shock of their audacity, the sheer coldness of their attack, hit me like a physical blow. My stomach churned with a mix of humiliation, profound sadness, and a burning, unfamiliar anger. They weren't just trying to steal my money. They were attempting to strip away my very sanity, my independence, my cherished home. In that moment, watching Michael's pathetic silence, I knew something inside me had irrevocably shifted. The docile, grieving widow they thought they controlled was gone. A fierce, unyielding resolve took its place. This was no longer about just saving my assets. It was about reclaiming my life. My story didn't start with that awful brunch. It began decades ago, in a modest Boston neighborhood where life wasn't handed to you on a silver platter. My parents worked hard, and they taught me the value of every penny. But they also instilled in me a hunger for knowledge. I wasn't the kind of girl who dreamed of ball gowns. I was the one poring over ledgers, fascinated by how numbers told a story. Even as a child, I saw patterns others missed, a knack that would shape my entire life, though I never imagined where it would lead. I met Arthur when we were both just starting out, full of dreams and a little bit of fear. He had this raw ambition, a vision for building things, but his head wasn't always in the books. That's where I came in. I wasn't formally trained, but I taught myself everything there was to know about accounting, working late nights with textbooks spread across our kitchen table. I became the quiet force behind his construction business, the one making sure every beam, every brick, every dollar was accounted for, building our future brick by painstaking brick. Arthur used to call me his silent engine. While he was out making deals and supervising sites, I was meticulously managing every single financial detail, from payroll to complex tax forms. My mind, sharp as a tack, could recall specific figures from years ago, an almost photographic memory for numbers that served us incredibly well. I prided myself on my unwavering integrity, making sure every transaction was clean, every record transparent. We built a reputation not just for quality construction, but for absolute honesty. Our shared life was built on principles of hard work and careful planning. We saved, we invested wisely, always thinking ahead, always prudent. We believed in earning every success, never cutting corners. This wasn't just about accumulating wealth. It was about building a secure, stable life, a foundation for our family. I wanted Michael to grow up knowing the value of honest labor, and the peace of mind that came from living within your means, lessons I thought I had taught him well. When Michael came along, he became the center of my world. I was a loving mother, perhaps a bit reserved, but fiercely devoted. I always tried to see the best in him, even when he made mistakes, always encouraging his ambitions. I poured my love and hopes into him, believing he would carry forward the values Arthur and I had worked so hard to establish. He was our only child, our greatest joy, and the heir to everything we had painstakingly built together. Our beautiful home, the one they tried to take from me, wasn't just bricks and mortar. It was filled with memories. Michael's first steps, family Christmases, Arthur's booming laugh. Every room held a piece of our history, a testament to our journey, from humble beginnings to a comfortable, secure life. It represented not just financial success, but the culmination of a lifetime of dedication, a legacy I envisioned passing down intact to Michael for his own family. Before Arthur passed, life felt stable, secure. We had weathered storms, celebrated triumphs, and built a comfortable existence. I felt a deep sense of accomplishment, looking around at the life we had created, believing our future, and more importantly, Michael's future, was set. I had plans for my retirement, simple joys, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing I had done right by my family and by myself. I was happy, content, and utterly unsuspecting of the darkness that lay ahead. Then, a year ago, Arthur was gone. The grief was a physical weight, a fog that settled over everything. It left me adrift, vulnerable, and utterly alone in a way I hadn't known since childhood. It was in this profound state of loss that Michael and Sarah, my son and his wife, stepped in. They offered comfort, support, and most critically, to help me with my affairs, a gesture I, in my raw sorrow, welcomed with open arms and a trusting heart. I trusted them implicitly, completely. They were my family, my son, and the woman he chose. I believed they loved me, and that they would uphold the legacy Arthur and I had built. I handed over access to accounts, signed documents they said were for ease of management, never once questioning their motives. I saw only their smiles, their reassurances, completely blind to the insidious greed that was already festering beneath the surface, slowly consuming them. Everything I had, everything I was tied into that trust. My independence, my financial security, my cherished home, the very memories of Arthur, all of it was now in their hands. The thought of losing it all, not to some external disaster, but to the very people I loved and believed in, was a weight too heavy to bear. It wasn't just money. It was the stripping away of my identity, my past, and the future I had so carefully planned, leaving me with nothing but betrayal. That Sunday brunch, that public shaming, didn't just end when I walked out of Michael's house. It was the beginning of a living nightmare, a slow, agonizing descent into a life I barely recognized. The financial ruin they had orchestrated became starkly, brutally clear in the weeks that followed. Every bank statement, every bill that arrived, was a fresh wound, a reminder of their calculated theft. My once meticulously managed accounts were now a chaotic mess of overdrafts, overdue notices, and fees I couldn't possibly pay. It wasn't just my savings that were gone. I was buried under a mountain of debt they had accrued in my name, a cruel legacy of their greed that threatened to consume me entirely. My beautiful home, the one Arthur and I had built with our own hands, filled with decades of cherished memories, was suddenly a cage, not a sanctuary. The foreclosure notices started arriving, stark white envelopes that felt like death sentences. Each one was a physical blow, a confirmation that they weren't just taking my money, they were taking my past, my present, and my future. The thought of losing the only place I truly belonged, the repository of my entire life with Arthur, was a pain so profound it made the financial loss seem almost secondary. It was an assault on my very identity, a cruel stripping away of my security. The public humiliation at brunch had wider ripples than I initially understood. My social circle, once a source of comfort and companionship, began to shrink, almost imperceptibly at first, then undeniably. Phone calls stopped coming, invitations dwindled. Some friends offered platitudes of pity, their eyes filled with an uncomfortable avoidance, as if my situation was contagious. Others, who had always admired Michael and Sarah's lavish lifestyle, seemed to believe their narrative, that I was indeed a difficult, senile old woman, deserving of my fate. I became isolated, a pariah in my own community, feeling invisible and utterly alone. Being treated like a failure, a burden, was a constant stinging insult. Sarah, of course, reveled in her perceived victory, subtly twisting conversations with mutual acquaintances, painting me as irrational, ungrateful, and increasingly confused. She'd call me, ostensibly to check in, but her voice dripped with condescension, her words veiled threats, always reminding me of her control. Michael, meanwhile, remained conspicuously absent, his silence a deafening testament to his abandonment. His betrayal, his spineless complicity, was a constant ache, a gaping wound in my heart that refused to heal, making me question every memory of his childhood. I'd catch glimpses of Sarah online, or in the local society pages, always impeccably dressed, smiling brightly at charity events, her philanthropic endeavors lauded. She seemed to thrive, her social standing only elevated by her supposed care for me, while I withered away in my increasingly threatened home. The injustice of it was a bitter pill to swallow, watching her flourish on the bones of my life, her public image a stark contrast to the private devastation she'd inflicted upon me. Her success felt like a direct mockery of my suffering, a cruel twist of the knife. Small defeats chipped away at my spirit daily. The humiliation of having to choose between groceries and a necessary prescription, the indignity of having my credit cards declined in public, the shame of unanswered calls to Michael. Each incident, however minor, compounded the pain, deepening the sense of powerlessness. I, Eleanor Vance, the woman who had meticulously managed an entire business empire, was now struggling to manage my own dwindling existence, a prisoner in my own home, constantly reminded of their callous disregard for my well-being. The days blurred into a monotonous cycle of worry and despair. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. My nights plagued by restless thoughts, replaying their cruel words. Michael's silent betrayal. My appetite vanished, leaving me gaunt and frail. My physical health, once robust, began to decline under the relentless stress. I felt myself disintegrating, not just emotionally and financially, but physically too, a shadow of the woman I once was, trapped in a body that felt alien and weak. There were moments, brief and terrifying, when I truly believed I was losing my mind, just as Sarah had accused. The constant gaslighting, the emotional manipulation, The sheer weight of my grief and betrayal made me question my own sanity. Was I really just a senile old woman, deserving of this fate? Had I brought this upon myself? The doubt was insidious, a poisonous whisper that tried to erode the very core of my being, threatening to extinguish any remaining spark of self-worth. One afternoon, a particularly aggressive debt collector called, his voice cold and dismissive. He spoke to me as if I were a negligent child, utterly incapable of understanding my own finances. He threatened legal action, property seizure, all the things Michael and Sarah had promised to protect me from. Hanging up the phone, my hands trembling, I stared out the window at the familiar garden Arthur and I had tended together. A profound sense of helplessness washed over me, a feeling of being utterly alone against an insurmountable tide. But then, something shifted. It wasn't a sudden revelation, but a slow, burning ember deep within my chest. The helplessness began to morph into a simmering rage, a cold fury that pushed back against the encroaching despair. I looked at my reflection in the window, seeing not just a frail old woman, but the ghost of the sharp, capable Eleanor, who had built an empire from scratch, the woman Arthur had called his silent engine. They had underestimated me. They had mistaken my grief for weakness, my trust for naivete. They had seen an easy target, a vulnerable widow to be exploited. But beneath the layers of sadness and humiliation, the old Eleanor, the forensic accountant, the meticulous planner, was still there, dormant but not dead. The outrage, the sheer audacity of their betrayal, began to fuel a new kind of energy, a fierce determination that started to push through the fog of my despair. I remembered Arthur's words, "Eleanor, you're the smartest person I know. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise." His voice echoed in my mind, a comforting anchor in the storm. I recalled the complex ledgers I'd balanced, the intricate financial puzzles I'd solved, the quiet battles I'd won for our business. My mind, though clouded by grief, still held those skills, those memories, that unwavering logical precision. They were not gone, they were merely waiting. The thought of fighting back, initially a fleeting, desperate wish, began to solidify into a concrete intention. It wasn't just about reclaiming my money or my home anymore. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my identity, and the truth. It was about showing Michael, that I was not a senile old woman to be discarded, but a force to be reckoned with. The fire in my belly grew hotter, burning away the last vestiges of self-pity. They had stolen my peace, my security, my trust. They had tried to steal my sanity. But they hadn't stolen my mind, my will, or my memory. That was still mine, and it was going to be my weapon. The quiet despair that had consumed me for so long began to recede, replaced by a steely resolve, a cold certainty that justice, on my terms, would be served. They had pushed me to the brink, but in doing so, they had unwittingly awakened a sleeping giant. I started to look at their actions not with hurt, but with the analytical eye of an accountant, searching for discrepancies, for patterns, for weaknesses. Every cruel word, every stolen dollar, every public slight became data points in a mental ledger, feeding a growing case against them. The initial shock had given way to a quiet, methodical anger, a transformation from victim to strategist, meticulously observing my adversaries. The first tangible step was small, almost imperceptible. I began to organize the scattered bills and overdue notices, not with panic, but with a newfound, almost clinical detachment. I created a new folder, labeled simply Records, and tucked it away where no one would ever find it. This was no longer just about survival. It was about preparation, about building my defense, brick by painstaking brick, just as Arthur and I had built our home. The bitterness of their betrayal still lingered, a constant companion, but it was no longer paralyzing. Instead, it became a potent motivator, a constant reminder of what I had lost and what I intended to reclaim. The pain was still there, but now it was a silent promise, a vow whispered in the quiet solitude of my home. They would regret this. Oh, they would regret this deeply, utterly, and publicly. I remembered the days I'd spent poring over Arthur's business books, finding hidden errors, uncovering subtle patterns of malfeasance in other companies. My mind, once a steel trap for numbers and details, slowly began to reawaken, shaking off the rust of grief and neglect. This intrinsic skill, this ability to see beyond the surface, was something they hadn't accounted for, a secret weapon they never knew existed. They had pushed me to the very edge, stripped me of almost everything. But in their arrogance, they had left me with the one thing I needed most, a burning, unyielding determination to fight back. They thought they had seen the last of Eleanor Vance, the sharp, formidable woman who built a life from nothing. They were wrong. They had only just begun to see her. My life had indeed changed drastically, but not in the way they intended. I wasn't disintegrating, I was transforming. The despair had been a chrysalis, and from it, a steely resolve was emerging, sharper and more dangerous than anything they could imagine. They had drawn first blood, but I was about to play a game they didn't even know they were in, and I was going to win. They thought they had stripped me bare, left me with nothing but despair. They saw a frail old woman, easily manipulated, her mind clouded by grief, fading into irrelevance. But what Michael and Sarah failed to understand, what their greed blinded them to, was that my greatest asset wasn't a visible fortune or a loud declaration. It was something far more subtle, more dangerous: my mind. The quiet, analytical engine that had always run Arthur's business was still very much alive, just waiting for the right moment to ignite. For decades, while Arthur was the charming face of our construction company, I was the quiet, sharp force behind the scenes. I wasn't just an accountant. I was a self-taught forensic investigator of numbers, able to spot discrepancies, trace complex transactions, and uncover hidden patterns that others missed. My memory for figures, for every detail of every ledger, was almost photographic. This skill, this almost obsessive meticulousness, was something they completely overlooked, dismissing it as just an old woman's hobby. What they also didn't know was that I had always kept a meticulous, hidden set of shadow books for Arthur's business. These weren't official records, but my personal, detailed ledgers, documenting every single transaction, every investment, every potential liability. It was a habit born from my innate caution, a just-in-case measure I'd maintained for decades, a secret world of numbers tucked away where no one, not even Arthur, fully understood its scope or its potential. These shadow books weren't just old records. They contained irrefutable, undeniable proof of Michael and Sarah's financial misdeeds. Every fraudulent transfer, every shell corporation they'd set up to siphon money, every coerced signature on a document designed to strip me of my assets. It was all there, meticulously logged, cross-referenced, and ready to be exposed. They had been so arrogant, so certain of their cleverness, that they never imagined anyone would be looking, let alone me. They believed they had covered their tracks perfectly, that their elaborate schemes were impenetrable. They saw me as a victim, a dottery old woman whose complaints could be easily dismissed as senility. They underestimated my intelligence, my resilience, and the deep, burning anger that their betrayal had ignited. They never considered that the quiet woman who managed their inheritance was also the one who could unravel every single one of their carefully constructed lies. Beyond the ledgers, there was another hidden resource they knew nothing about, a small, untraceable offshore account. Arthur, always the pragmatist, had discreetly established this rainy day fund years ago, a secret stash for emergencies. It was modest by their standards, certainly not enough to live lavishly, but it was enough. Enough to give me the necessary seed money to fight back, to secure legal counsel, without them ever knowing where the funds came from. My most crucial ally, however, wasn't a document or an account. It was Daniel Dan Miller, a high-powered corporate lawyer specializing in white-collar crime. I had mentored Dan in his youth, back when he was a bright, eager law student struggling to make ends meet. I saw his potential, helped him with his tuition, and guided him through his early career, always quietly, always from the shadows. He owed me, not just professionally, but personally. Dan was more than just a lawyer. He was a fierce and loyal advocate. He had seen the ugly side of corporate greed, and he had a reputation for taking down powerful, corrupt individuals. He understood the intricacies of financial fraud better than anyone I knew. Knowing I could count on his unwavering support, his sharp legal mind, and his deep understanding of justice, gave me a surge of hope I hadn't felt in months. So, there it was. My sharp, unyielding mind, The meticulous shadow books filled with their financial crimes, Arthur's secret rainy day fund, and a brilliant, loyal lawyer ready to fight by my side. They thought they had left me with nothing. But they had left me with the very weapons I needed to dismantle their entire fraudulent empire, piece by calculated piece. They had no idea what was coming. The moment I realized I had these resources, the shift within me was palpable. The crushing weight of despair began to lift, replaced by a cold, clear focus. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about justice. They had made a grave mistake, underestimating Eleanor Vance. They thought they had won, but the game had only just begun, and I was about to show them exactly what happens when you awaken a sleeping dragon. The night of Sarah's grand charity gala finally arrived, shimmering with false glamour at a downtown hotel. I walked in quietly, not the shriveled old woman they expected, but composed, dignified, with Dan Miller by my side and Marcus Thorne, the retired detective, a few steps behind. The air buzzed with self-congratulatory chatter, the clinking of glasses, and the scent of expensive perfume, all a stark contrast to the quiet storm brewing beneath the surface. Sarah, radiant in a designer gown, was already basking in the spotlight, completely oblivious to the carefully laid trap about to spring. This was her stage, her moment of triumph, but it was about to become her downfall. I watched her glide towards the stage, her smile wide and artificial, ready to accept her humanitarian award. My heart, which had been a drum of dread for so long, now beat with a steady, cold rhythm. As she reached the podium, bathed in the soft glow of the spotlights, I caught Dan's eye and gave the smallest, almost imperceptible nod. It was the signal. The moment I had planned, rehearsed, and waited for, through all the pain and humiliation, was finally here. The silent engine was about to roar, and the world was about to see the real Serafina Hayes. Suddenly, the massive projection screens flanking the stage, meant to showcase Sarah's supposed good deeds, flickered. The elegant charity logos vanished, replaced by meticulously detailed financial statements, bank transfers, and doctored photos. Every illicit transaction, every shell corporation, every penny stolen from my accounts and others, flashed across the screens in undeniable clarity. Simultaneously, a wave of phone vibrations swept through the room as breaking news alerts popped up, detailing the unfolding investigation into Sarah's fraudulent activities, directly citing the leaks I'd carefully planted. The gasps began, then whispers, then a horrified silence. The elegant gala descended into utter chaos. Sarah, frozen at the podium, her face draining of color, looked like a deer caught in headlights. Before she could utter a single word, uniformed officers moved swiftly, apprehending her right there on stage. Her carefully curated public image shattered into a million pieces. Her reputation irrevocably ruined in front of the very society she had so desperately tried to impress. I saw Michael in the crowd, his face ashen, the realization of his complicity, his impending ruin dawning on him. He stumbled back, his lavish lifestyle, his job, and his freedom vanishing before his eyes. As they led Sarah away in handcuffs, past the stunned faces of her friends and benefactors, I walked slowly towards her. My voice, soft but clear, cut through the murmurs. "Darling," I whispered, leaning in close so only she could hear. "Your mother changed the password. And now, you've paid the price." There was no triumph in my tone. Just quiet justice. My home was safe. My dignity restored. The public humiliation they inflicted was now theirs to bear, a fitting end to their greed. I walked out, not a victim, but a survivor, finally at peace.